Number 1.
It took DNA, genealogy and a lot of work, but after 11 years, the case of the brutal killing of a woman in her Carlsbad apartment, an attack that still lacks apparent motive, has been solved, authorities said Tuesday. Jodine Serrin, known to family as Jodi, was found dead in her bed on Valentine's Day 2007. The 39-year-old was developmentally disabled but highly functioning. Her killer, Carlsbad police say, was a man named David Mabrito. The one-time Oceanside resident is dead now, from suicide 6 years ago. Mabrito was 38 at the time of Serrin's slaying in 2007. His death, at age 42, came shortly before the 4th anniversary of her death. Lieutenant Greg Curran said the department is sure Mabrito is their suspect. Investigators were told his DNA was a probable match to evidence found at the crime scene, and that the likelihood that someone other than Mabrito was the suspect is 1 in 64 quintillion, a number with 18 zeros in it. You have to be sure, Curran said. We are telling a family we have solved this. That's a big deal. Serrin's family issued a statement through the police department, saying, Jodine taught us all with her special challenges, perseverance and love of nature. There was joy in her laughter, love in her heart and faith in her soul. No one from Mabrito's family could be reached immediately for comment on his designation as a murder suspect. The mystery of who killed Serrin frustrated police and her family for years. After getting no database hits on the killer's DNA, investigators turned to 2 new and complementary technologies: phenotyping and forensic genealogy. Phenotyping uses artificial intelligence to predict what a person's likely eye, hair and skin color are, as well as their face shape and ancestry and such, and that helps create a computer image of the person. Last year, on the 10th anniversary of Serrin's slaying, Carlsbad police released a computer image of the suspect. It was based on DNA the agency had given to Parabone Nanolabs, which can reverse engineer the genetic material. Officials released this computer image of the suspect based on phenotyping last year, on the 10th anniversary of Jodine Serrin's slaying. A photo of the man who Carlsbad police named Tuesday as their suspect was not available. Ellen Greatack, director of bioinformatics at Parabone, said Tuesday that the work can provide police with a suspect description, helpful to prioritize their suspect list, as well as to potentially exclude people. It takes an investigation that seems infeasible and gives you a place to start, Greatack said. The second new method is forensic genealogy, in which genealogists use open-source DNA database to jump into family trees and poke around for a potential match. Forensic genealogy was most famously used to identify the suspected Golden State Killer earlier this year. Until the new science came along, detectives in Serrin's case did not have somebody to look at as a potential suspect, Curran said. He said that once investigators had Mabrito's name, they were able to obtain his DNA from a different law enforcement agency. It was DNA, Curran said, that had not been entered into any databases because Mabrito had died. Investigators don't know if Serrin and Mabrito knew each other, but they don't believe so. There's nothing to indicate it, Curran said. The nature of their relationship and how they cross paths is unfortunately gone with the people that are involved. There are other unanswered questions too, most notably a motive for murder. About 10 p.m. on Valentine's Day 2007, Serrin's parents went to her La Costa condo. They found the front door chained, the lights on and no response from their daughter. Her father busted through the front door and headed into his daughter's room, but walked in on a man atop his daughter, in what appeared to be an intimate moment. Serrin's father stepped out. He and his wife waited briefly for an embarrassed couple to emerge. They did not. The father went back inside the bedroom and found his daughter's unclothed body on her canopy bed, cold to the touch. The man was gone. Authorities said Jodi Serrin died from blunt force head wounds. through the police department. Serrin's family, which found support National Organization of Parents of Murdered Children, also said it is forever grateful to the Carlsbad Police Department for their outstanding efforts in attaining justice through resolution of this tragic case.
Number 2.
The 3 teenagers were all strangled within a 21-month span. Though their lifeless bodies were discarded in rural areas miles from New Orleans, each had lived in the gritty French Quarter of the late 1970s, and police believed all 3 had worked as hustlers there, trading sex acts for money. Police have long suspected the 3 murders were committed by one person. But the trail went cold, and no one was ever identified as the killer. Recently, however, investigators with the Louisiana State Police and the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office, along with authorities in Mississippi, have begun re-examining the slayings of Dennis Turcotte, 19, Raymond Richardson, 17, and Daniel Dewey, 17, who were all found dead between February 1978 and November 1979. A state police spokesman late Friday confirmed that troopers and other local law enforcement agencies are involved in the new investigation. Turcotte's body was discovered on February 3, 1978, in woods between the St. Tammany Parish communities of Tallahassee and Abita Springs. Richardson's was found the next month in a deserted area near Interstate 10 in Pass Christian, Mississippi. Dewey's body, which was unidentified for years, turned up November 12, 1979, on a road running alongside a garbage dump in Greensburg, in St. Helena Parish. The agencies involved in the inquiry have been tight-lipped about what prompted their renewed interest, or exactly which aspects of the case will be scrutinized anew. Often, renewed investigations of cold cases start with reprocessing physical evidence, such as fingerprints or DNA, using technology and databases that may have not existed when the items were first collected. Turcotte, Richardson, and Dewey all died just a few years before the discovery, in the Mississippi River, of the corpse of Edward Wells, another 17-year-old boy who spent much of his time in the French Quarter, and was thought by police to dabble in prostitution. Though Wells' 1982 death was classified as a drowning, New Orleans police said 6 months ago that a detective specializing in cold homicide investigations was re-examining the case, which remains shrouded in mystery. That separate inquiry began after New Orleans police received a new allegation about disgraced former New Orleans cop Stanley Burkhart, who had investigated Wells' death, while largely running the city's child abuse investigations in the 1970s and 80s, before he was unmasked as a pedophile himself and imprisoned. The new allegation was that Burkhart, decades ago, had bragged about murdering a teenager who matched the description of Wells. The man who made that accusation, Richard Winman, has previously testified to being sexually abused as a teen by Burkhart. He said Burkhart would threateningly ask him if he wanted to end up like Eddie, going so far as to show him the picture of a boy's body as it was pulled from the river. One law enforcement source familiar with the probe stressed that Burkhart is not considered a suspect at this point in the deaths of Turcotte, Richardson, and Dewey. Also, the recent re-examination of Wells' death has not yielded criminal charges against Burkhart, who's been released from prison, or anyone else. Perhaps it is not surprising that the Turcotte, Richardson, and Dewey murder investigations went cold. Detectives believe all 3 were French Quarter-based male sex workers. And French Quarter denizens who knew Turcotte, of Slidell, Richardson, of Biloxi, and Dewey, of Oklahoma, may have been reluctant to admit it in the 1970s, when the gay dating and sex scene there was very active, but still very closeted, said Frank Perez, a longtime neighborhood resident and historian of the neighborhood's LGBT community. Perez said it was also disturbingly common for gay people in the French Quarter to die violently in those days. One apparent serial killer fatally stabbed a number of gay men in the Quarter, while another bludgeoned them to death with a hammer, said Perez, adding that he was never aware of any suspects being arrested. Meanwhile, Paris said police couldn't arrest the man suspected of setting the June 24, 1973, fire that killed 32 people at the Upstairs Lounge, a gay bar in the Quarter, before the man took his own life the following year. Taken together, those sorry episodes left many in the city's gay community skeptical about the criminal justice system. Not only was there a lot of violence against homosexuals, but the police didn't give a expletive, Paris said. Still, by October 1997, state police had made it a priority to solve the deaths of Turcotte, Richardson, and Dewey, whose name at that time was still unknown. A trooper named Dennis Stewart sat down with a Times-Picayune reporter and disclosed that all three teens had been tied up and strangled, their hands, feet and neck bound with a rope or cord that would tighten the more they fought to free themselves, a major reason why the slayings were thought to be the work of a serial killer. They all shared slight builds and similar hairstyles, and they hung out and worked at the same restaurant in the French Quarter, Jimmy's Coney Island hot dog stand, Stewart said in the October 7, 1997, article. The hot dog stand on Royal Street, now closed, figures prominently in Windman's account of meeting Burkhart as well. Windman says he met the cop in the late 1970s, when he was about 13, working at Jimmy's Coney Island as a dishwasher and busboy. Stewart said there were promising leads, but all crumbled. A suspect was booked in Turcotte's murder the same year his killing was reported, but the St. Tammany Sheriff's Office said prosecutors regarded the case as weak and dismissed the charges. Focus later turned to a serial killer on California's death row who claimed to have murdered dozens, until investigators confirmed he wasn't in Louisiana at the time Turcotte, Richardson, and Dewey died, the Times-Picayune article said. Stewart at the time said he was optimistic that better technology and techniques to process evidence would help crack the case, and the state police asked the public to call in tips. Nothing came of it, Stewart, now retired, said in a recent interview. But he didn't give up. Mainly working on the case during his own time, he managed to identify the body in Greensburg as Dewey in 2008. He took a colleague's suggestion to run fingerprints from the body through an FBI database that wasn't available years earlier, and they matched those of Dewey, taken for a misdemeanor traffic arrest in Texas shortly before his death. Stewart's discovery allowed Dewey's family to hold a memorial service in his honor before cremating his remains and giving them to his brother, an Associated Press article at the time said. Recently, Stewart said he was still hopeful that improved technology would lead to the most important breakthrough of all for Dewey and the rest, the arrest of whoever killed them. I didn't have a lot to work with, said Stewart, who grew up near Greensburg. But the good thing is that crime scene and forensics, processing technology, was not then what it is today.
Number 3.
Catherine was last seen leaving her Oconomowoc High School prom during the early morning hours of June 5, 1974. The prom was held at the Concord House Dance Hall, on an Interstate 94 interchange in Concord, Wisconsin. Catherine got into an argument with her boyfriend at 3 a.m. She stepped out for a breath of fresh air and never returned. She has never been heard from again. Catherine was supposed to spend the night at a friend's house, so her mother didn't realize she was missing until the next day. Her mother does not believe Catherine ran away. She was scheduled to distribute programs at the Oconomowoc High School commencement the day after her disappearance, and was going to serve as the maid of honor at a family wedding, and it would be unlike her to miss these events. She is described as a happy teenager who had no problems and no reason to leave. 6 years after Catherine's disappearance, the bodies of a dating couple, both 19 years old, were found in a wooded area a month after they vanished from the parking lot of Concord House after a wedding reception. Due to the similarities, there was some speculation that their murders and Catherine's disappearance were connected. In 2009, DNA evidence led to the arrest of a suspect, Edward Wayne Edwards, in the double murder. He near the Concord house in 1980 and worked there as a handyman. He has a substantial criminal record dating back to 1955 and was once on the Federal Bureau of Investigation's 10 Most Wanted list. Authorities don't believe Edwards was involved in Catherine's disappearance, however, as he wasn't even in the state of Wisconsin when she went missing. Catherine's mother held a memorial service for her in 1995, 21 years after her disappearance. Her case remains unsolved.
Number 4.
I've covered a lot of missing persons cases on this channel, both solved and unsolved. With the exception of Marvin Clark, who I talked about a few months ago, this might be the oldest one I've ever covered. Let's talk about Mary Agnes Moroney, who hasn't been publicly seen or heard from in almost a century. Mary Agnes Moroney was born on May 9, 1928 to parents Michael and Catherine Moroney. She was soon joined by at least one younger sister, though some sources said she had two. In 1930, 2-year-old Mary Agnes lived with her family in Chicago, Illinois, but the family wasn't doing too well. Michael Moroney had just lost his job a few months earlier, as I imagine was the case with many people during the Depression, and Catherine was pregnant again. So he put an ad in the newspaper asking for help. Most sources said he was looking for material things, but one said he was asking for a job. On May 14th of that year, a woman showed up at their door. She said her name was Julia Otis and she'd been sent by a social worker named Mrs. Henderson. Julia bought things for them like groceries and baby clothes. She also offered to take Mary Agnes to California, but her parents didn't let her go. The next day, Julia showed up with even more things for the family. She offered to take Mary Agnes clothes shopping, and her parents agreed. They left the house and didn't come back. The next day, the Moroneys received a letter from Julia saying she'd taken Mary to California and would bring her back in a couple of months. According to IllinoisMissing.org, the letter read as follows: "Please don't be alarmed. I have taken your little girl to California with me. I have hired a special nurse to care for her. We'll be back in 2 months. By that time you will be on your feet again and will be able to care for her." She didn't even cry a bit. She is outfitted like a princess. In the meantime, I'll help all I can to get you on your feet. Don't worry about her or anything else. When you get this letter, we'll be on our way already. As ever, Julia Otis, another source, said part of the letter read, "Mary Agnes is on the way to California. You can spare her for 2 months." Regardless of exactly what the letter said, the Moroneys never heard from Julia Otis again. They contacted the police the day they received the letter. About 2 weeks later, the Moroneys received another letter, this one from a woman named Alicia Henderson. One source said she was Julia Otis's aunt, another said her cousin. Either way, she told the family that Julia had lost her husband and child a year earlier, and that she was love-hungry, so she'd taken Mary Agnes. But when police examined the letters, one from Julia Otis, another from Alicia Henderson, they thought the handwriting looked very similar. Because of this, they were afraid Mary Agnes had been killed, presumably by her parents, though it's never been stated explicitly. Michael and Catherine were actually arrested on May 20th, when police couldn't find any trace of Julia Otis, but were let go after an hour. Not much else happened in the case for over 20 years. Then, in early 1952, a report ran in the Oakland Tribune in California about the case that included Mary Agnes's picture. A local mechanic named Everett McClelland saw the report and thought the picture looked a lot like his wife, Mary McClelland. 24-year-old Mary McClelland knew she was adopted. Her mother said she had witnessed her birth and adopted her in November 1927, before Mary Agnes Moroney was even born. Her doctor backed her up, saying he'd arranged the adoption in 1927. Mary McClelland also didn't have a scar on her abdomen that Mary Agnes should have had. but other sources say McClelland had been adopted after Mary Agnes disappeared. Anthropologist Dr. Bertram S. Krause examined McClelland's teeth and said there was a match. And when McClelland's fingerprints and blood type were tested, they were found to be similar to the Moroney family, indicating she could be a member. In September 1952, Mary McClelland met up with the Moroney family. Catherine Moroney was skeptical from the start that this was her missing daughter, but they agreed to try and work on a relationship. DNA testing would later prove that Mary McClelland was not Mary Agnes Moroney. She died in 2005. According to a post on an Ancestry.com message board that appears to be started by McClelland's granddaughter, this DNA test happened in 2009. So despite the early police speculation that Mary Agnes's parents were involved in her disappearance, most people I've come across online discussing this case believe she was kidnapped and raised by someone, probably Julia Otis. The only real question is, where are they now? Unsurprisingly, there has been speculation that Julia Otis was a false name. It would make sense. After all, why would you use your real name in the process of committing a crime? And if Julia changed her own name, she almost certainly changed Mary Agnes's as well. A few people on websites have done some digging and think they may have found either Mary Agnes or Julia, but of course nothing is confirmed. One interesting thing I want to point out that I haven't seen anyone else discuss is the first letter the Moroneys received. Assuming it really was from this Julia Otis, I think it's interesting that they reportedly received it the day after Mary Agnes was last seen. Even today, mail takes several days to get to its intended destination, and I can't imagine it being much better in 1930. I think the fact that it arrived so soon after Mary Agnes's disappearance could be evidence that the whole thing was premeditated. Julia Otis, whoever she really was, might have seen Michael Moroney's ad in the paper and, unfortunately, decided to take advantage of their situation. Mary Agnes Moroney was 2 years old when she disappeared from her home in Chicago, Illinois on May 15, 1930. Her case is classified as a non-family abduction. Mary Agnes is a white female with blonde hair and blue eyes, and was 3 feet tall and 20 pounds at the time of her disappearance. She has a scar on her abdomen and a strawberry birthmark on her face. She is left-handed. If she were alive today, she would be 92 years old. Mary Agnes was reportedly last seen with a woman who went by Julia Otis. She was described as being in her early 20s, well-dressed and with protruding teeth. This case was a bit difficult to research because it's so old. A lot of information was either never online or used to be and has since been taken down. There were also a lot of contradictory details, so I did the best I could to be accurate. The good news is that I came across a lot of people online who claim to be relatives of Mary Agnes and want to find out what happened to her. So with all these people looking, I think there's a good chance she will be found. If you have any information about the disappearance of Mary Agnes Moroney, you can contact the Chicago Police Department at 312-746-9690.
Number 5.
Oregon, Wisconsin, and Idaho authorities are asking for the public's help in solving a 35-year-old cold case involving the disappearance of a man last seen in Idaho Falls. This Saturday, November 7th, marks 35 years since Randall Dean Leach was last seen in Idaho while traveling to Bend, Oregon in 1980. Randy Leach, then 20 years old, was last seen the morning of November 7, 1980, walking away from a dairy farm west of Idaho Falls, Bonneville County Sheriff Paul Wild said. According to a 1982 Deseret News article, Leach had told his family he was going to hitchhike to his sister's house in Bend. Leach, of Sheboygan, Wisconsin, was described in newspaper articles and police reports as white, between 5'83" to 5'93" tall, 140 to 160 pounds, with brown hair and blue eyes. What we know is that he stopped in Idaho Falls to make a few bucks before moving on, Wilde said. The last we know about him was that he was leaving our area, either to Oregon, or he may have gone to Salt Lake City. But once he left, he disappeared, and we have no idea where he went. The missing man's father, Richard Leach, told Deseret News in 1982 that the last person to speak with Randy Leach said he thought he might be going to Klamath Falls, Oregon. But during the last 35 years, Oregon State Police have not received any information or confirmation that Leach arrived at his final destination or if he had even reached Oregon, according to an OSP News release. Compounding the problem is that the original Bonneville County Sheriff's Office missing person report has been lost. When they changed over record management to microfiche about 10 years ago, there was a series of cases that were put in, but they were not checked to make sure they were on the tape, Wilde said. So when I went looking for it, lo and behold, it wasn't there. The family is still seeking answers, even after 35 years. The case may be cold, but it's not forgotten, Wilde said. The Sheboygan County Sheriff's Office became involved in this investigation due to a friendship between Randy's father, Dick Leach, and the deputy inspector of the detective division at the time Randy went missing, according to the news release. The family and investigators have worked to obtain Randy's dental records, which have been uploaded to the National Dental Image Repository. These images are now available to law enforcement and medical examiners nationwide in case he is found. More information about this case is available at East Idaho Cold Cases and on the National Missing Person Directory. If you have information about Leach, contact the Bonneville County Sheriff's Office at 208-529-1200 or the Bonneville Idaho Falls Crime Stoppers at 208-522-1983.
Number 6.
Stefanie, a student at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, had taken a year off from her studies to travel. She spent several months in Asia before hitchhiking across America. She began her journey in New York with the plan of traveling back to California. She never made it home. Stefanie had tried to rent a room in Winnemucca, but there were no rooms available. A motel clerk attempted to help Stefanie find a room in Reno instead, but this never came to fruition. Stefanie last contacted her parents from the Four-Way Cafe and Truck Stop in Wells, Nevada. She called them from a payphone and left a message, stating, "Hi Mom, I'm in Nevada. I'll be home late. Leave the key under the mat." This was the last time Stefanie ever spoke to her parents. In November 1998, police received a tip from a man who claimed that Stefanie's body was thrown down a mine shaft near Battle Mountain, Nevada. The location is between Wells and Winnemucca. The man allegedly confessed to her murder but later recanted. The FBI and local investigators searched several mine shafts. However, no trace of her was found. It is not known if the man is still considered a suspect in her case. In 2003, serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells confessed to Stefanie's murder. In 1987, he was working for a roofing company in Winnemucca, near where she was last seen. He claimed that he picked her up while she was hitchhiking and told her that he would take her to Reno, Nevada. After taking LSD together, he strangled her, put her body in concrete, and dumped her in a hot spring that he described as being 30 feet wide. Despite extensive searches for the hot spring, it was never found. Sells also confessed to the murders of Loria Bible and Ashley Freeman, two missing girls who vanished in 1999 after Ashley's parents were murdered. However, he was later ruled out in that case. Another suspect later pleaded guilty to the murders. In April 2014, Sells was executed by a lethal injection. Although some investigators believed his confession in Stefanie's case, others did not, and believed that he was not involved. In 2010, investigators looked into the possibility that Dale Wayne Eaton was responsible for Stefanie's disappearance. Eaton is a suspected serial killer, convicted of murdering Lisa Marie Kimmel. He is suspected in several other disappearances and murders, including that of Amy Rowe Bechtel. Sadly, no trace of Stefanie has ever been found. If she is still alive, she would be in her mid-50s. Please contact the Las Vegas FBI office 702-385-1281 if you saw or heard something around the time Stefanie disappeared. More information is desperately needed to solve this case, and any information you can provide to authorities would be very helpful.